appreciate being invited here today to speak about grits. Jatan told me I had an hour to speak. Is that correct?
Put the gavel down.
Well, Cindy told me if I talked for longer than 15 or 20 minutes, she was going to start throwing stuff at me. So.
There's a hook.
Yeah, there's a hook, okay. All right. Well, first of all, let's talk about grits history, and probably first about the name. What does GRIT stand for? Granny's riding into town safely. It's actually the Green River Intra-County Transit System, and if any of you knew my former boss, Ron Logston, his vocabulary was embarrassingly large. And so I asked Ron one time, I said, shouldn't we be inter-county? And he said, oh yeah, and then he gave me a long explanation of what all that meant. We really should be inter-county, not intra, but you know, who knows, it's still an I, so it doesn't make any difference. But we actually serve, in the beginning, grits served within the county it was in. In other words, there was a vehicle assigned to that county. It did transportation within that county. Now, of course, we go across county lines. We travel to Louisville probably 3 or 4 times a day, to Nashville probably at least once a day, Marion, Illinois, very frequently. It's grown, to say the least. It actually started in 1977, and it started as a co-op project between GRAD and Audubon Area Community Services. Jeff Taylor, who is currently the Chief Justice of the Kentucky Court of Appeals, worked at GRAD at the time, and he, along with Ron, had written a grant to apply for funds to start a rural transportation service. It was a demonstration grant. It was awarded. It was the smallest grant of its kind in the United States, and the only one that survived. All the rest of them that started with the original perished, and so we're still here and going well. Rod Logston, as I mentioned, was very instrumental in starting grits and the service. Also, Buddy Fuquay. Buddy's family was in the bus line business in Davis County for several years, and Buddy was selected as the first transportation director of grits. And Buddy served in that capacity for over 20 years and did a great job, really set the foundation for what we were to become. I'm the third director, and like I said, we're still there, so I haven't ruined it yet. Somebody asked me what I was proud of. I'm proud of the fact I didn't screw it up, so it's still there and going well. GRITS is funded through the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. If you've been to Frankfort, you've seen that gigantic transportation cabinet building. It's huge. The Office of Transportation Delivery occupies about 5,000 square feet in that building. And that is the department that we actually correspond with. All of our funding flows through them. The FTA funds them, and they in turn fund us. That's where a lot of our operating money comes from. The 5311 grants, 5310 grants, the basic transportation grants. Now, a big chunk, and what really operates our program, comes from Medicaid. Those funds also flow from Medicaid into the Office of Transportation Delivery and then to us. GRITS is a broker for the Medicaid system. Fortunately, due to the Affordable Care Act and what it's done for Medicaid in Kentucky, we are not taking any federal funds. We haven't for over a year. We're self-sufficient currently. How long that lasts depends on what the governor does, of course. And if things stay stable, we'll be able to continue to operate without federal subsidy. I'm pretty proud of that. Most programs that are in the transportation business require federal subsidy. So, what areas do we serve? Now, obviously, we serve the GRAD region, all 7 counties, with different services, and I'm going to go through those in a minute. But we serve all 7 of the GRAD counties. We also serve as the broker for Medicaid transportation in the purchase area. We serve 8 counties down there in the purchase area as the broker for Medicaid transportation services. Of course, everybody who's involved with GRAD understands all this, and GRITS and AACS. The government can't function without acronyms. But it's the HSTD program, as it's referred to, and I'll explain why it's referred to as Human Services Transportation Delivery, which is actually Medicaid transportation. But I'll explain there are a couple other programs involved in that. So we serve those areas. In this area, we have a multitude of services in the grad area. In the purchase area, we are strictly a Medicaid broker. So Bill, during my introduction, touched on the fact we do probably 1,800 trips a day. They're for all sorts of purposes. We do medical services. We do take people to get their hair appointments. We take people shopping, out to eat, all sorts of different services, but about 1,800 trips a day. We have 105 employees currently, and we have about 90 vehicles. People tell me all the time, you must have hundreds, but they're all painted the same, primarily, so they all look the same, so you see them a lot moving around. So the biggest question I always get from anybody who asks me about grits, the first question is always, well, who can ride with grits? And the answer to that is really pretty simple. Anyone. There are no restrictions. Anyone can ride grits. Now, how you ride and under what program you ride and what it costs you to ride is much more complicated. But the answer to that question is always anyone can ride. Anybody can ride with grits. So the biggest program is the Human Services Transportation Delivery, or Medicaid transportation. And I'm just going to briefly touch on what the qualifications are for that. First of all, a client has to be going to a Medicaid service. In other words, they're going to a doctor's appointment, they're going to an adult daycare, they're going to a medical procedure appointment, but it has to be for a Medicaid paid-for service. That's the first qualification. And some of the rules are very strange. One of the rules we have is there can't be a vehicle in the household. So it's not that these people are avoiding driving their own car to a medical appointment, it's that they don't have a car to drive. So that's one of the parts of this. Now, it can be that the vehicle's not wheelchair capable. It can be that the vehicle's used to transport the primary driver back and forth to work or to education, then they're eligible. But the main thing is no vehicle available to them to use and go into a Medicaid service. So there are other programs that function under the HSTD program, and that's why it's called HSTD and not Medicaid. Department of the Blind also has a program that we provide transportation through. Those clients who are eligible for that service need to contact the Department of the Blind, and they'll refer them into the program. Voc Rehab also uses our services through the HSTD contract, and once again, they contact their local Voc Rehab service, and they determine if they're eligible and pass them along to us. We also do some work with foster parents. Foster parents who have Medicaid-eligible children can transport them in their own vehicle, and we reimburse them for that. Once again, that's something you have to get set up. One of the other programs we do that's basically exploding is veterans transportation. Currently, and I say currently because in the last 3 years this program's changed about 5 or 6 times. So the rules are constantly fluctuating, but anyone who's a veteran who needs transportation to a medical appointment needs to contact us. We can do that for them free of charge. How long that lasts, I have no idea. Right now, it's basically being funded because of the Affordable Care Act, and so it's dependent upon that at present. There have been grants that have come and gone for veterans transportation. We've tried to keep that going. The Affordable Care Act has allowed us to do that. So that's currently the status of the veterans program. They can go to medical appointments free of charge. We do paid fares. In other words, if one of you wants to ride on the Grits bus to any destination, as long as you're traveling within the grad region, it costs $1.10 a mile. If we travel outside of that region, it's $1.50 a mile, which sounds cheap. Unfortunately, that's pretty expensive if you're trying to take a client in a wheelchair to Louisville. That's a pretty costly trip. I wish there was some other way to do that, but there's not. So at the present time, that's the status and has been for about 10 years. We do charter service. Basically, we're into small charters, 23 passengers and below. We do charter service. We're pretty competitive at that. We've got some nice vehicles we do it with. If you're interested in getting a group together and going shopping or going out to eat or going to a ball game, contact us and we can work with you to get that arranged. And we can go for virtually any reason. Title III. Title III is a little confusing. That is a program that's funded through GRED to the counties and through their senior citizen centers. What Title III allows them to do, and if you look at the original legislation, it's to help persons live a better life, basically. To get to medical appointments, to get to social activities. So the senior citizen centers work with us using these Title III funds. And a common trip is to Rough River. We take people up there to the lodge for social activity, to Patty's Place down in Grand Rivers, a lot of those kind of social activities. We also take them to senior days, but we also take people, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but people who are very difficult to serve. And there is a certain category that really has a problem when it comes to transportation, and it revolves around dialysis. And many county judges use their Title III funds to aid with dialysis transportation. I'll explain why that's so important in just a minute. But Title III is intended for persons over the age of 60, but the uses for those funds are multiple. So there's all sorts of things you can do with your Title III funds. The common question we get is, what can we use it for? Well, we don't know. Whatever you want to. So it's very flexible. We do the paratransit service for the city of Owensboro, for the Owensboro Transit System. If you live in the city limits of Owensboro, it's a tremendous benefit. Our typical charge is $4 minimum charge, or $1.10 a mile. And you can see if you go 3 times a week how that starts to rack up. But if you live in the city limits of Owensboro, we're only allowed to charge twice what the fixed route transit bus charges. They charge $1, we charge $2 each way. So first of all, you're getting it for half price. And that is the best deal out there. And it's particularly useful to people who are on dialysis. Now what makes that possible? Well, what makes it possible is the city of Owensboro applies to the FTA for subsidy funds to help that operate. And without those subsidy funds, we could not offer that service. But it is a door-to-door service, so if you're in a wheelchair, you live in the city limits, for $2 we'll take you to your doctor's appointments, to get your hair done, your nails done, or shopping, or out to eat. And it truly is a great service for the citizens of Owensboro. We also offer intercity service, and I think we passed out some brochures on that. What intercity service is designed to do, and there's a schedule in here, and I'm not going to try and read that to you because I'll get lost. But what intercity service does is brings people from small communities. And we're talking about in Union County, it's Sturgis and Morganfield, into a larger city in the area. In Union County and Webster County, we take people in 1 day a week for $1 round trip to the city of Henderson. In Hancock, Ohio, and McLean counties, we bring those people into Owensboro 1 day a week for $1. And what this service is intended to do is give those people who utilize it the opportunity to come to a bigger city, to shop, to dine, to do things they may not get to do. And that vehicle is wheelchair capable, and we need to know that up front if they're a wheelchair client. But what they do is go to their senior citizen center in their town, and they'll have the tickets, and like I said, tickets are $1 for a round trip. So there really is no, if you hear someone in your community that really needs to get out and socialize and get some activity with some people, please tell them about this service. Now I get this question all the time, folks. Well, why don't you promote this more? Why don't you advertise it more? Well, we do brochures, it's on our website, but at $1 a trip, the advertising budget's pretty small. So the word has to really get out by word of mouth. But if you know someone in that situation that really needs to get out and do something and socialize and get that interaction that we all know is very important as we get older, this is a great service for them. But any age can ride. The bottom line on all this is, as you've picked up on by now, our program is fairly complex and complicated. The best practice, if you know someone has a transportation need, is to tell them to call us. If they call, and let me give you these two numbers, it's on our brochure, but here in Owensboro, it's 686-1651. And we have a toll-free number, that's 800-816-3511. And it's an automated attendant, of course, like everybody has now, and they push 1 and they'll get reservations. And the reservationist can go through all the programs and explain to them what they can do. Once again, it's complex and complicated. If somebody says, hey, I called and they couldn't do this or couldn't do that, call us back again, because it is a complicated and complex program, and we do make mistakes. I like to minimize those, but we do make mistakes. So what are the challenges that face us? What are the problems we face? And this one may sound like a surprise, especially on a day when it's 80 degrees outside and gorgeous and sunny. But in the wintertime, people who are on dialysis, and dialysis is a real problem. It's booming because people are having more failures with kidney failures. And the problem is, if you go to dialysis, if you've never had any experience with it or known anyone on it, you go 3 days a week. You go or you die. It's that simple. You go and get the treatment or you die. So it's pretty necessary treatment. So even in the wintertime, when it's snowy and icy and slick and everybody's saying, oh, well, you know, we're going to shut down today, we can't. We have to go. Now the problem we encounter, typically we can get to the house. Last year I think we only put 1 bus off in the ditch, which does happen. Thankfully there weren't any clients on board, just a couple of drivers and they were okay. But the problem we get to when we get to the home, the driveway's not shoveled, the sidewalk's not shoveled, and we can't help them in that situation. I really need to find some way to work with someone who's willing to go out and shovel some sidewalks and driveways and that kind of thing in that situation. So if you know someone that might be interested in helping in that predicament, because first of all, folks, most of our people are on Medicaid. And I've sat in a meeting where the emergency management folks were all there, and some guy said, well, why don't they just pay somebody to shovel their driveway? Well, if you're on Medicaid, you're concerned about how much you've got to eat for the next 2 days. You can't afford to pay somebody to shovel your driveway. It's just that simple. And secondly, if you're going to dialysis, you can't get out there and shovel the driveway yourself. Most of them are in wheelchairs. So it is a real problem. It's one of the things we face. Now, speaking of dialysis, the other problem we face is people on Medicare. Medicare has no transportation funds available. Medicaid does. Medicare does not. So a person on Medicare who's on dialysis has to go 3 days a week, who lives in, let's just pick a location, Utica. So that means they've got to come to Owensboro 3 days a week, and we charge $1.10 a mile. Well, roughly, mathematically, that's $32 a day. times 3 days a week, that's $100 a week. Once again, most people can't afford that. It's a real problem, and we are working on some solutions to that, trying to find some funding, but it's a real problem. Dallas is, like I said, is exploding. More and more people are going on it every single day, and this is truly a problem. So those are the two problems we're facing, as well as these uncertain future revolving around the Affordable Care Act, particularly in the state of Kentucky. The Affordable Care Act has been the best thing that ever happened to us. Like I said, it allowed us to operate without federal subsidy. Allowed us to offer some things like veterans transportation that we couldn't offer before. But what happens in this uncertain future, nobody knows. But that is also a problem we face. The future of our fleet, this is another challenge we're facing. If you've noticed our buses much, we have about 65 Ford Econolines. Ford Econoline was built starting in the 1960s. It's a plumber's van. It gets to the end of the production line and they take a giant saw and cut the back end of the Econoline off and threw it in the trash can, and then they built a bus body on the back of it. Well, Ford decided to cancel the Econoline. It's no longer being produced. They stopped producing it about a year or two ago. And by 2020, it's still being produced as a cabin chassis, which is what we use. By 2020, it's going to be eliminated 100%. So we don't know what the future vehicle is going to look like for us. And the future is quickly getting here. I mean, we're sitting here in 2016 and we're thinking 2020 is a ways off, but not really. The Affordable Care Act, like I mentioned, we don't have any idea how that's going to affect us. Public transit funding in the state of Kentucky. When people get mad at me, which is occasionally, there are usually three things they say. And one of them is always, well, my tax money goes to support grits transportation, and that's true. Sure. Well, I'm almost done.
You got 45 minutes left anyway.
Oh, okay. I'm almost done. So, the public transit funding, I'm always tempted to say, let me just refund your contribution to public transportation for the year in the state of Kentucky. But the stamp's going to cost as much as your contribution. It's 37 cents. All of the states around us are much, much, much beyond that. And we've got to do something to increase public transit funding in the state of Kentucky if we want Kentucky to continue to grow and prosper. We're getting more and more and more people who rely on public transportation. We have tons of immigrants coming here to work in factories that are just outside of Owensboro. They want to live in Owensboro because it's a bigger city with better services. They got to get to work out there, and they need public transportation. And it's tough to offer that with 37 cents per taxpayer per year. So that's another challenge that needs to be looked at. But with that, I'm basically done, Jatan. I'm going to shut up. And I can come back for questions if anybody has any.